I still remember the cold air that brushed my face as I stepped out of my car that December afternoon. The sky above Richmond, Virginia, carried that soft gray tone that always appears before a snowfall, and the wind had the sharp bite of winter. My in-laws' grand home stood proudly at the top of the hill, wrapped in thick garlands, bright lights, and ornaments that probably cost more than $3,000 just to hang. The porch columns were tall and white, almost too white, like the kind you only see in magazines or in old European estates Margaret loved to brag about. Every time I came here, I felt like I was walking into a stage where someone else had already decided the script. I took a deep breath before stepping inside. I had been married to Michael Turner for 6 years, long enough to know exactly how these gatherings usually went. His mother, Margaret, liked to put on a show for the holidays. She loved control. She loved attention. And she especially loved reminding me in small, sharp ways that I had married into their family, not the other way around. I held my smile steady as I walked through the front door, telling myself I could handle just one more night of fake joy and polite conversations. But the moment I stepped into the living room, I felt something different in the air. It wasn't just the cinnamon candles or the sound of carols playing from the expensive speakers. It was the stillness, the quiet shift, like a page had already turned without me noticing. Margaret stood near the fireplace, proudly posing as if she were the queen of this house. The mantel behind her was decorated with gold ribbons and a $1,200 wreath she bought from a European shop in New York. She had mentioned that at least 20 times over the years, so I never forgot the price. But it wasn't the wreath that made my stomach twist. It was the woman standing beside Michael. She was tall, young, and dressed in a red velvet dress that shimmered with each small movement. Her hair fell in soft waves over her shoulders, and she looked at me with an expression I couldn't read. Not guilt, not shame. Something like curiosity. Or expectation. Margaret rested a hand on her arm as if she were presenting royalty. And then, with a voice loud enough to grab the entire room's attention, she said, "This is Sabrina. She's been helping Michael with so many things while you've been busy." The words hit me like cold water.
Busy.
That was Margaret's favorite way of saying I wasn't good enough. I kept my smile steady, though my hands felt warm as if I were holding a secret flame. I had known something was happening behind my back for months, but seeing it displayed so boldly in front of me felt like watching someone rewrite my life while I was standing right there. Still, my heart didn't shake. It didn't race. And that surprised me. It stayed steady because I already knew what Margaret didn't. I had uncovered every lie Michael had tried to hide. I had been watching his movements, his spending, his late-night messages. For 8 weeks, I had tracked everything quietly, like a woman rebuilding her strength behind a curtain. There were withdrawals from our joint savings account, extra charges on his business account, hotel receipts from Boston, and a $500 bracelet purchased in New York. Little signs that built a bigger picture. Nearly $45,000 gone without explanation. He thought I was clueless. He thought I was still the same trusting wife who believed every excuse he gave about work stress or late meetings. But I had learned to listen to my instincts, and they had been whispering to me since early fall. Still, I didn't want to strike before I had the truth in my hands, so I let him think he was smarter than me. And I let Margaret believe she held all the power. Now, standing in that grand room filled with soft lights and the warm scent of pine branches, I waited for the perfect moment. The room was full of holiday cheer, but the kind that feels hollow when your heart knows something dark is hiding behind it. Margaret squeezed Sabrina's shoulder gently, as if comforting a bride before a wedding. Sabrina leaned toward Michael, and he tried to look casual, but I saw the tension in his jaw, the stiffness in his shoulders. He knew the truth would come out soon. He just didn't know how or when. I moved through the room, greeting people, acting like nothing bothered me. But my mind stayed focused. I remembered the meetings with my lawyer, Grace Miller, in Atlanta, the folders of documents she helped me collect, the quiet strength she told me to hold on to. I remembered the long nights staring at the ceiling, trying to decide whether love was worth fighting for when the person beside me had already stepped out of the circle we built together. Margaret wanted tonight to be unforgettable. She wanted to humiliate me in front of the entire Turner family. She wanted to show everyone that Sabrina was the new woman she preferred for her son, the one she believed could replace me. But what she didn't know was that the moment she opened that door, she started a change she could not control. She thought she had full power. She thought she had won. She had no idea that I had come prepared to rewrite the ending of her story. And the night was only beginning. I stayed near the edge of the room, letting the warm light from the Christmas tree flicker across my face as I watched the scene unfold. It felt like I was standing inside a play where everyone except me had rehearsed their lines. Michael moved around the room pretending nothing was wrong, pretending we were still the same couple who once laughed over late-night pizza and held hands on the porch. Sabrina walked close behind him, smiling at every dull joke, touching his arm like she already shared a life with him. And Margaret watched from her throne-like chair, glowing with satisfaction, as if everything was falling neatly into place. But none of them knew what I knew. None of them knew how much I had discovered in the last 2 months. None of them expected me to stand there with a steady heart and a mind full of facts they hoped I would never learn. I remembered the early signs that something was wrong. The late-night messages, the sudden interest in grooming, the missing money from our joint savings. At first, I told myself he was stressed from work at the firm in Washington, D.C. But the signs grew sharper, louder, harder to ignore. So I did what any woman would do when her heart whispers a warning. I followed the truth. I visited our bank in person and asked for a printout of every account that had my name tied to it. The clerk raised his brows at some of the charges, but I stayed calm. There were withdrawals I didn't recognize, charges for expensive dinners, and transfers to an account I didn't know existed. A $500 bracelet from a shop in New York, a hotel suite booked in Boston, and even a $2,000 transfer labeled only with the letter S. I didn't need to guess what it stood for. It took strength to keep breathing as I held those papers in my hands, but I did. And instead of confronting him immediately, I decided to build a full picture of his betrayal. I went through our credit card statements, cross-checked receipts, and even called a few of his clients to confirm some things he claimed he had purchased for work. Every answer led me deeper into the truth he was trying to hide. When I finally contacted Grace Miller, the lawyer in Atlanta, I felt like I was walking into a new life. Grace had a firm voice and eyes that didn't flinch. I told her everything, from the missing money to the emotional distance that had crept into our marriage like frost on a window. She listened without judgment, then said calmly, "If they're planning something for the holidays, you should plan something stronger." Grace helped me prepare every document I needed, bank statements, property papers, spending records, all packed neatly in a folder that now rested inside my purse. Just touching it made me feel grounded, like I wasn't standing here alone anymore. Now, in this room full of holiday lights and false cheer, I watched the betrayal unfold right in front of me. Sabrina walked with the easy confidence of someone who believed she had already stepped into another woman's life. She didn't know the truth yet. She didn't know Michael had been lying to her, too. She didn't know Margaret was using her as a tool in a bigger scheme. What hurt wasn't the betrayal itself. It was how smoothly they thought they could do it, how easily they assumed I would break, or worse, remain quiet. Margaret clapped her hands loudly, gathering everyone around the large Christmas tree that looked like it belonged in a magazine. I knew she had spent almost $10,000 decorating that tree this year, something she told everyone proudly. She loved expensive symbols of power. She loved things that sparkled. But she never paid attention to the things that actually mattered. With a proud smile stretching across her face, she said loudly, "Michael has been making new plans for the future, with someone who brings real value." Her eyes drifted toward Sabrina, as if she were presenting a gift to the entire room. A few guests murmured in surprise. Some smiled politely. Sabrina took a small step forward, her face pink with excitement. Michael looked at me for a moment, just one thin second, but he quickly looked away. That tiny flicker of fear in his eyes told me everything. He knew something was coming, but he didn't know when. I stood perfectly still, my hands resting gently on my purse. My heart didn't pound. My breath didn't shake. The warmth inside me came from the truth I carried. From the pages that held every detail of his secret life. From the steady knowledge that I wasn't the weak one in this room. Margaret continued talking, praising Sabrina, hinting at changes the family would soon celebrate. She spoke as if she were announcing a new heir to the Turner legacy. As if I were already gone. As if the life I built for years could be erased in one holiday gathering. But what none of them understood was that I had already prepared myself for this moment. While they planned their little show, I built a stronger one. While they whispered lies behind closed doors, I collected the truth silently. My moment was coming. And once it arrived, every secret they tried to hide would fall into the open like shattered ornaments on a cold wooden floor. I stood there listening to Margaret praise Sabrina as if she were handing her the keys to my life. I watched Michael shift nervously from one foot to the other, his eyes darting around the room as if he were waiting for someone to save him. No one would. Not tonight. Not after everything he had done so quietly behind my back. I held my purse close, my fingers brushing against the folder inside it, the one that had taken weeks of careful gathering, checking, and confirming. That folder was the truth. And tonight, the truth was finally going to speak. When Margaret paused to draw a breath and prepare for her next line, I stepped forward. Not dramatically. Not angrily. Just calmly, with the sort of confidence that grows when you have nothing left to lose and everything left to protect. My voice came out steady, even warm, as I said, "Margaret, before you continue, there's something the family should know." Her smile grew, as if she believed this was the moment I would break. She tilted her chin slightly, waiting to watch me fold. Michael stiffened, his shoulders locking. Sabrina blinked, her polite smile faltering as she sensed a shift in the room. I reached into my purse and pulled out the folder. Grace had organized every document with perfect order. The first page carried a title in bold letters, Property Ownership Transfer, Richmond House, 2021. I held the folder with both hands, letting everyone see the heading before I opened it. "I want to clear something up," I began, keeping my tone soft. "You've all been told that this house belongs to Michael. The Turner family invested in it. That I simply live here." The music from the speakers seemed to fade on its own. Conversation stopped. Even the air felt still. I looked at Margaret. Her smile wavered, but she forced it back into place. "But that isn't true," I said. "This house is mine. It has been in my name for the last 4 years." The words hit the room like a silent earthquake. Margaret's face froze, the smile cracking as if it were painted on thin glass. Michael's complexion drained, turning a shade I had never seen before. Sabrina blinked rapidly, her lips parting slightly in disbelief. I opened the folder fully. "Every mortgage payment," I continued, "came from my business income. Every renovation, the new roof, the remodeled kitchen, the deck Michael loves to brag about, was paid for by me. I have the receipts. I have the bank statements. I have every piece of proof you could ask for." I laid the papers gently on the coffee table, spreading them so anyone who dared could read them. Margaret took a step forward, then stopped as if her body refused to move any closer to the truth. "And that's not all." My voice stayed steady. "While I was paying for this home, for our life, Michael was spending money in places he didn't want me to know about." I lifted the second set of documents. Pages filled with highlighted bank transfers, hotel charges, and purchases made with our joint savings. "Here is the bracelet he bought in New York," I said, tapping a line on the page. "Here is the hotel suite in Boston. And here," I held up a transfer slip, "is the $2,000 sent to someone labeled us. I'm sure we all know who that is." Gasps spread through the room. Sabrina took a small step back as if her shoes had turned to ice. She looked at Michael, searching for the lie he always kept ready. "You told me this house was yours," she whispered. "You said your wife was leaving. You said everything was already decided." Michael stammered, reaching for her arm, but she pulled away. Her face turned red with humiliation, and she folded her lips tightly as if holding back tears or anger. Maybe both. I nodded to her gently. "He lied to both of us." Margaret finally tried to speak, but only a strangled sound came out. She pressed a hand to her chest, staring at Michael as he had just destroyed the Turner legacy with his bare hands. Her plan, the grand reveal, the humiliation she wanted me to feel, had collapsed at her feet. "It was never yours to give away," I said, turning to her with calm certainty. "This home isn't part of your family's control. It never was. And the lies you built around it end tonight." The room was dead silent. Even the fireplace seemed to stop crackling, as if it too were listening. Michael stepped forward, finally, his voice cracking. "Listen, we can talk about this privately. You didn't have to." "I did," I said firmly, "because you tried to build a future on lies. You used my money, my trust, and my home. And then your mother brought another woman here, into this house, as if I were already gone." Sabrina turned to Margaret, her voice shaking. "You told me he was done with her. You told me she didn't want the house. You told me he was free." Margaret swallowed hard, her face turning stiff and cold. She had no answers. Her plan had burst open like a balloon full of secrets. I straightened my shoulders, feeling the weight of every silent suffering I had held inside finally lift. "You all thought I came here unprepared," I said. "You thought this night would break me. But the truth is simple, I already knew everything." Then I softly closed the folder and stepped back. And in that moment, watching all their faces sink into shock and shame, I realized something powerful. The show they planned ended up revealing only their own lies, not mine. The quiet in the room after my reveal was heavier than anything I had ever felt. It wasn't the warm silence that comes after a good meal or shared laughter.
No.
This was the kind of silence that follows an explosion, when the dust is still settling and everyone is afraid to breathe because the truth has already done its damage. I stood there, steady on my feet, watching the faces around me twist with shock, guilt, anger, and confusion. Their holiday lights flickered across the walls, but even those seemed dimmer now, as if the house itself knew the lie at its center had been exposed. I didn't yell. I didn't crumble. I didn't give them the show they expected. Instead, I placed the final set of legal documents on the table. My voice stayed calm, almost soft, as I said, "I'll be filing for divorce after the holidays. The funds I need have already been moved. The house stays with me." Michael blinked as if I had spoken in another language. His face went blank, then tight with desperation. He reached out and tried to touch my arm, but I stepped back before his fingers even came close. That small movement felt like cutting the last thread tying me to a marriage that had already died months ago.
"Don't," I said.
"You made choices. Now I'm making mine." His mouth opened, then closed, then opened again, like he was trying to form a defense but couldn't find a single truth to stand on. He had lied too much. He had dug his own grave one transaction at a time, one message at a time, one secret moment at a time. Across the room, Sabrina stood frozen in her velvet dress, her cheeks flushed with humiliation and anger. Her voice trembled when she finally whispered, "I didn't know. I want nothing to do with this." And just like that, she turned and walked toward the door. The wind slipped in as she opened it, catching the hem of her dress. She didn't even bother grabbing her coat. She left the house with her arms wrapped around her shoulders, shivering, her fantasy shattered before it even began. Margaret sank slowly onto the sofa, one hand pressed against her forehead, the other gripping the edge of a cushion like she might fall off the earth if she let go. Her carefully styled hair looked suddenly older, her confidence stripped bare. She stared at the documents spread across her coffee table, the mortgage records, the receipts, the transfers, each one confirming that the control she believed she held over my life had never been real. Not even for a second. The rest of the family didn't dare speak. They looked at me with a mix of sympathy and disbelief, as if they were only now realizing that the quiet, polite woman they had watched for years had been far stronger than any of them knew. A few lowered their eyes, embarrassed to have taken part in a plan they didn't fully understand. Others simply looked stunned, unable to process how quickly the power in the room had shifted. I picked up my keys with a steady hand. The metal felt cold but solid.
"Real. Mine."
I walked toward the door, my steps slow, deliberate, each one echoing softly across the hardwood floor. No one stopped me. No one called my name. Not even Michael. Somehow, that silence felt like the clearest answer I would ever receive. When I stepped outside, the cold air hit my face like a cleansing wave. The sky above Richmond was dark and calm, the stars faint behind thin clouds, but the world felt wide open around me. I let the cold settle into my lungs and exhaled with a sense of relief I hadn't felt in months. I walked to my car, opened the door, and sat for a moment with my hands on the steering wheel. The glow from the house windows spilled into the driveway, but it no longer felt like it belonged to me or that I belonged to it. I drove away slowly, watching the house shrink in my rearview mirror. With every foot of distance, the weight on my chest lifted. By the time I reached the bottom of the hill, I felt lighter, as if the version of myself trapped in that house had finally been set free. In the weeks that followed, I rebuilt my life piece by piece. I moved to Charlotte, North Carolina, and bought a warm, cozy townhouse for $380,000, paid with my own money. Money earned through work I had never been given proper credit for. The townhouse wasn't large or flashy. It didn't have the marble floors or grand staircase Margaret loved to show off. But it had something her house never held for me.
Peace.
I furnished it slowly. A soft gray couch. A rustic wooden table I found at a small shop in Asheville. A set of warm lamps that made the evenings feel gentle instead of cold. I chose everything carefully, only bringing items that felt like they belonged in a home built on truth, not appearances. Each morning when I woke up, daylight streamed across my bed, and I felt something I hadn't felt in years: safety. No secrets, no lies. No shadows creeping through my thoughts. Just me, breathing in a home that finally reflected my own strength. Sometimes, while drinking coffee on my new porch, I thought about that holiday night. I thought about the moment Margaret introduced Sabrina, like a gift. I thought about the lies Michael had told, the money he spent, the future he tried to rewrite without me. And then I thought about how I stood there, alone but powerful, holding the truth like a shield. They had tried to replace me. They had tried to make me the weak one. Instead, they revealed themselves. Margaret's plan cracked. Michael's story crumbled. Sabrina's fantasy dissolved. Their power slipped away the second I spoke the truth. And I walked away stronger than any of them ever expected. Now I live my life on my own terms. My own home. My own voice. My own peace. And sometimes, when winter lights glow in the distance, I smile. Because I know I didn't just walk away from that house. I walked toward a better version of myself.